Hi. Are you here to volunteer?
Yeah.
Great. For the 3 o'clock hour?
Yeah, I know I'm kind of early.
No, you're perfect, right on time. Okay, so you guys are starting at 3. This is your name tag and your hour tracker. For every hour you sort, you get 2 pounds of free fabric or 2 yards of free fabric at the shop. So you'll just hold on to this and bring it. Yeah, have fun. There were a couple things about growing up in Albuquerque that I think were important for where I am now. One is that we were in a rural part of Albuquerque where we didn't have curbside trash collection, and so once a week or every other week I would actually ride with my dad to bring our trash to a county transfer station. So I was in a way seeing the volume and the buildup and understanding that even though I put it in the garbage, we then had to take it someplace else. So yeah, that I think was really important, was having to manage things past the trash can and just understanding that it went somewhere else. There's no law yet that says that clothing can't be thrown away. On the business side, for businesses, which residential waste and business waste, they're very, very different. On the business side, in New York City only, not a state or even anywhere near national legislation, but New York City only, if your business waste is 10% or more textile, you're supposed to be recycling it. There's not a lot of enforcement, and because there's not a lot of enforcement, almost none of the businesses that I work with now even knew that that was a law. You can donate some of this pre-consumer textile waste, which is extra yardage or fabric samples from mills or mock-up and mutilated garments. You can donate some of that to like arts organizations or fashion schools, but they're not set up for the volume that is produced. So for example, we work with one company where we pick up 10 to 12 bags a week. That's one company in New York City. There's 900 fashion companies in New York City. So an arts organization can maybe take 4 boxes from a company, but they can't take 4 boxes times 900. So they become very selective and just take things that they want and know that they can work with, but then the designer's kind of left with passing it off to friends or family or giving it away when they can. Sometimes it's proprietary though, it's got logos or trademark patterns on it, in which case a lot of stuff gets burned or incinerated to protect the IP for the brand. But outside of the very select things that could be given away, there wasn't anything that was addressing the full scope of textile waste created in a design office, which is why FabScrap was born. More traditional recyclable commodity streams like metal, glass, plastic have been in the private industry forever. Like, we don't think that we're donating a plastic bottle when we recycle it. However, textiles have been mostly managed by nonprofits, and so there's this confluence with donation and recycling that becomes really confusing. And because it's been managed by nonprofits for so long, there hasn't been the proper investment in the technology to properly handle this waste stream like as a waste commodity stream. So for plastic, the technology there is incredible. There's conveyor belts, a laser shines through the plastic, immediately reads what type of plastic it is, and then these puffs of air will sort it off the conveyor belt. So it's very cleanly sorted. All textiles are sorted by hand, whether it's pre-consumer, post-consumer. And I think that's just because having it in the nonprofit world for so long, there hasn't been the proper investment. But there's no reason that similar scanning couldn't happen to tell us the fibers in a fabric. And eventually I think we'll get there. And the same way that plastic recycling is pretty robust, like you can take a plastic and turn it back into a plastic, we're starting to see private companies who are like, I can take a cotton and either mechanically or chemically break it back down to the cellulose level, respin it, create a new fiber, a new fabric from that. But they're early stages. And so I had this idea for a collection service, a recycling service that could redistribute fabric and recycle fabric and do all of this so that the brands don't have to think about it. They don't have to do the research to understand, like, this technology isn't ready, or this is the best use for wool, or here's where I can send my 10 rolls of denim. They don't have to do that. They can just trust that it's being handled properly. And then I think the biggest piece that was missing was I knew I could redistribute usable yardage, but what was I going to do with all the little pieces? And so finding a fabric shredder, who we're calling it recycling, but in true waste management, it's more downcycling. Like the fabric gets shredded and becomes insulation or carpet padding or mattress stuffing. So finding that piece where the small pieces could go was when I knew this would work. At Columbia, yes. I went to Columbia for grad school though, and so by that time I did have a better idea. Undergrad, I thought I was going to be a doctor. Like I was studying biology, but I found myself more interested in some of the natural resource classes, ecology, environmental science, geology, even some of the longer term things like evolution courses and genetics. And so I was not as into surgery and body systems. And there was a class where a professor was talking about climate change and sustainability, and it was the first time that it had been put in such a specific and impactful way for me. We're using the resources of 5 planets, and we have 1, and we have a really short time frame to fix that. But he also mentioned that scientists, while they're studying this and have answers and understand these dynamics, they're just really bad communicators. Like they publish journals and they talk at conferences, but making the message something that's meaningful for someone who knows nothing about the science can be really difficult when you're so deep in the specifics of the study. And so I think it was that week or the following week, I added a second major in education because I was like, well, if I can understand the science, but then also understand how to teach it and how to talk about it and make it digestible, then that would be a place where I could fill a need. So Columbia was really refining that, where it was not just environmental science, but it was specifically climate dynamics and climate change. And then the other half, the degree was called Climate and Society. That society piece was public policy and law and public engagement, public opinion, sort of the sociology around some of these issues. And so I knew I wanted to work at that intersection of the systems and the science and the public education. Yeah, at Columbia, one of my professors worked at sanitation during the day and taught there as an adjunct professor in the evening. And she was explaining some of the work that she was doing at sanitation. And she was looking at why there were different recycling rates in different neighborhoods. And so general consensus had been, well, it's an education thing or it's a socioeconomic thing. And I think what she was finding was that it was actually just different incentives that were resonating with different groups of people, even though everybody knew how and what to recycle. It was just whether or not there was a motivation in different neighborhoods. And so hearing her talk, which was exactly what I was interested in, is sort of like the operations and the education and sociology piece, I basically begged to be an intern. And so I interned for her that summer as the Department of Sanitation was launching their clothing recycling program. The department is split. There's civilian employees and then there's uniform employees. And so the uniform employees are usually who is starting to drive the truck or supervisors of districts and set schedules and routes and are responsible for all of the machinery. And so it's kind of split. I was definitely on the civilian side. And so I was working in the Office of Recycling and Sustainability, and that was more about the public education, the outreach, the engagement in new recycling initiatives, as opposed to the day-to-day operations of sanitation. The operations were overwhelmingly male, but our office was 80% women when I was there. I mean, I think the disconnect is super important. I think that's something that the organic food movement has done very well. They've done a good job of explaining how food gets on our plate. And I think because people still cook for themselves and still buy their own groceries, that's something that's easily connected. For fashion, which arguably has more issues along the supply chain, we no longer sew or buy fabric to sew. We just kind of buy finished products. So it's like our only option is to buy processed food. We're all buying processed garments. So I think that's part of the disconnect, is that sewing is a lost skill, understanding types of fabric. A lot of, like myself included, I thought cotton and linen were the same thing. So even just understanding fibers and like what things are made out of, totally not public knowledge. I think that is because so little production or sewing or construction of clothing happens in the home or even happens in our country. So much of it has been outsourced. Fast fashion is like McDonald's, like it's like a quick hit to kind of hold you over or supply a trend, or just because you need these quick things that are somewhat disposable, versus the piece that you invest in because it's a winter coat and you're going to wear it over and over. I think as a whole, it's easier and cheaper to fall in that fast fashion, fast food role. And we don't invest in something that's supposed to last that long. Maybe a TV, but even those now are upgraded so quickly. Computers are upgraded so quickly. So there's nothing that people buy a lot of recently that they feel like, I'll have this in 5 years. That's not the way that we shop. Thrifting bridges that gap where it's a different price point for something that can be a little higher quality and more of an investment piece, but it changes the accessibility of things. And so the reason that it's not weird to thrift anymore is because we're blending and blurring those lines. And that's largely to do with, I think, the way younger generations understand fashion. It's funny because I was at a meeting recently and people in industry will say it's education, and when consumers demand this, brands will follow. And I'm always playing devil's advocate there, because having worked for the city, we put so much into public education and our recycling rates have not changed. They hover around 15-18%. And so for me, I think there's a lot internally that brands could be doing. So much about a product's end of life is a design decision. Like, can its components be recycled, yes or no? If the components can be recycled, can it be deconstructed into those components, or are they all glued together? All of that is design decision. And so by the time a consumer has it and is ready to dispose of it, if it's really challenging to do that, that's because of a design decision. And so designers need to be understanding of those implications from the start. If their product isn't recyclable, they either have to fund recycling programs or take it back. If I had to take back a product, like legally required to take back a product, I would make that product deconstructible so I could recover the value where I could. I don't think consumers are gonna come up with information themselves to hold brands accountable. I think brands have to do more, and the way that they're pushed to do more is policy. And the reason the policy will happen and become important is because of data and understanding of the impacts. And so that's why we're so focused on the numbers. Let's quantify this, let's actually study what it is and characterize it. And so I think policy comes from transparency. Transparency can then inform a lot of what changes. If we do have a policy that requires certain things, then we see orgs that develop to certify brands. And then there's greater customer trust because now they have a certification that they can look for. It's very much a positive feedback loop that has to start somewhere. And I think that somewhere is information and probably policy. A truly sustainable brand isn't making new product. We have so much existing product, and I think that there's enough that exists that we shouldn't have to extract fresh resources to make new. And so for me, I look for things that are upcycled or recycled, something where there's a circularity that is not tacked on to their main business, but is core to how their business works. So I think that's one piece, but there's very few companies that can do that. Any company that's caring for their product past point of sale, I think, is on the right track. Places that have a lifetime warranty or do repairs or will replace or will mend or will tailor. Eventually, I think we'll see when they take back products and try and join the resale market, products will ultimately improve, because a company that can sell their product twice, once the first time but then take it back and like again used, a company that can sell their product twice will do better if that product can last through both of those sales. Okay, the hardest thing. I think the entrepreneur role is hard because at first you are every single position and wearing every single hat, and there were some hats that like I didn't know how to wear. So figuring out where it made sense to spend money and get help and what things it made sense for me to do myself was just trial and error. We didn't start working with a delivery company until year 2. So the first year I was driving myself and doing the pickups, and that was super important because I got to maintain a relationship with my very first companies. I got to understand the logistics and like what worked and what didn't around pickups, where there could be potential obstacles. So going through that process, even though it was hard, that learning is so important before you hand something off, because then there's no part of this business that I could hire for and feel like I couldn't do it, or like I don't know what I'm looking for, what I need to teach, because I've done all the parts for better or worse. But wearing all of those hats, you're code switching all the time and it's exhausting. I had to do a lot of preparation and like, how do I take care of myself? How do I take care of my mental state, my physical health, so that I show up as the best leader I can for this, particularly as I started to hire people. The investment that everyone's making in this as a startup nonprofit, everybody's really making a personal commitment, and so I really want to be the best and do the best for them and give them the most support possible. I think about all of those things all the time.